Mystery. At all times, it lingers around us, whispering in the depths of understanding, calling us to lean in further, to explore more, to ask the big questions. Faith and fact, certainty and the unknown. Can they dance with one another to not be at odds? Revealing the divine mystery at work in creation and embedded in all of existence. Unfolding that which is not seen, but always has been. I wonder.
What's up, Crosspoint students? My name is Ryan. If you don't know each other, I am the student pastor over at the Bellevue location. And today we're going to be talking about true faith. But before we get into that, I have a question for you guys. So who here has seen Spider-Man? I know it's a pretty loaded question because there's 4 Spider-Mans now. You've got the OG Tobey Maguire, which is the one that I grew up with. You've got Andrew Garfield, which you guys probably grew up with, and now the new Tom Holland and even Miles Morales. But in all of those movies, there's different versions of Spider-Man, but they all stay consistent with the origin of Spider-Man. And the thing about origin stories is that they answer questions that have been left unanswered. They connect the dots and bring us up to speed as viewers where the character is in their own story. They become puzzle pieces to figure to a bigger story. And for the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about some of the questions that cause us to wonder. Specifically, how God and science relate to one another and how it still lives with a sense of wonder and curiosity. And as we wrap up this series, I want to start this week by getting out some Jenga blocks. So the thing about stories is that some parts of the story are actually more important than others, right? Like now there are more than 30 movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And if you start watching somewhere in the middle, so many things get spoiled or just simply don't make any sense. I remember a friend who came to college with me and we went and saw Endgame in theaters. And this was his very first Marvel movie. And after the movie, he loved it and thought it was an absolutely amazing movie. But he had so many questions once the movie was actually over. But why? It's because he never watched these characters' origin stories. It made no sense. There was parts of the story that are crucial to the whole thing. It's foundational to go back and watch the beginning and the creation of these characters. So what does it have to do with Jenga blocks? Well, when we look at a tower, we can see that there are some parts to the building that are very crucial to the building of the structure, right? So like if you look at the top here, it's very easy and simple for me to take one Jenga block off. It's no problem. And in the middle, I can maneuver it around a little bit to take one of the middle pieces off. But if we look at the bottom, those are harder, right? Because these are the foundational pieces that are structurally sound to the actual Jenga blocks. And they make up the foundation of the whole structure. And when you're building something, it's important to make sure that what goes on the bottom is strong enough to hold everything up. And it's necessary that everything is in place and the pieces are there to make the structure of the building. In the same way, when it comes to our understanding of the world around us and when it comes to our faith, we want to make sure that's all built on something solid. We want to make sure that the most important parts of the story are where they belong. So then what does that leave us? And where are there parts that we encounter that may confuse us or not even make sense? We can be sure that we have a foundation for the tower and that the story that holds. The foundation that makes sense, a foundation that we can build our faith on. And so the question that we need to ask ourselves as we come to the end of this series is this: what foundation are you building your faith on? What holds up your faith? As Christians, there are many things that we structure our faith and our foundation on, right? Things like the Bible. And this is a great thing to build your foundation on, your faith on. Because in the Bible, it says that that all of the words written in here in the Bible are God-breathed and God-inspired. And so we can take these words and know that they are true. Some of us have done research on these stories in the Bible and know and have found out that there are many scientific facts that back up the things that have happened in the Bible. While others may believe them just because that's just what you've been told your entire life. Which leads me to my next point, is that family expectations may be a second reason where we've been building our faith. And for some of us, if we were really to be honest, we'd admit here that we're here because it's just what our family has expected of us. Which isn't necessary to be a bad thing, but you may still be debating what you believe. But you know it's important to your mom or your dad that you show up, or you have to be here because your parents just make you. And we're glad that you're here, but you've built up your faith based off of other people's expectations in your life. And it's not worth creating conflict by leaving your faith when you care so deeply about your family and what they think of you. So for a lot of you, go through high school with a faith either built on someone else's beliefs or traditions of the Bible and the biblical teaching, or the circumstances that you've been through. And maybe that's worked for a little bit of time, but here's the problem. If the building blocks of your faith are stories in the Bible, or the fact that other people, maybe including your whole family, believe, what happens when a classmate or a college professor or future boss challenges what you believe? If someone brings solid evidence that suggests that the stories you believe in are false, or the traditional beliefs of people closest to us are outdated, will you hit a crisis in your faith? Will the entire tower just crumble? If you have been challenged in your faith, trust me, the time will come. How will you react? Because studies show that over 65% of teens who don't make their faith their own before college end up not coming back to church once their faith is challenged. And whether that's simply going to college and having freedom to choose for yourself, or just never getting invited to get plugged into a local church. Once your faith is challenged after high school, what holds your faith, and what is your faith truly built on? And if someone can disprove your foundation, all the faith that you've built can come crashing down, just like this Jenga block. But here's the good news. It doesn't have to be this way. And science isn't the enemy here, and we can build our faith on foundation that will stand up to any argument or evidence that science presents. Even better, we can take what science says and not see it as a threat to the building blocks of our faith. We can build our faith on a foundation that has stood for 2,000 years and was actually intended to be a foundation of every Christian's faith from the beginning. So, what should the bottom block be? What is our foundation as Christians? To find out, we have to look back in the time at something that happened over 2,000 years ago. So 2,000 years ago, Jesus lived and then died by crucifixion on a cross. He was killed because he claimed to be the Son of God, and then said and did things that religious leaders couldn't imagine what God would say or do. Jesus lifted people that were normally looked down on. He included people that were normally excluded, and he loved and valued people that were normally typically looked over. That wasn't how the world worked back then. And for the leaders who were used to having power and the final say, they felt the position of power was being threatened by Jesus. So they had a plan to arrest him, have him beaten, and then killed. The crazy thing about that is that Jesus didn't even put up a fight. He went to Jerusalem. He went there and knew that there were plots made to have him arrested. He didn't argue or defend his case. He didn't hurl insults at soldiers or leaders falsely accusing him. He took it all on, and he died, forgiving them in the process. As the Son of God, Jesus could have made it all stop, but he didn't. Why? Because Jesus allowed himself to be put to death because of, as God's Son, he was the perfect representation of what God was like. Being willing to die when he had done nothing wrong, and then forgiving the people who had did it to him, allowed us exactly what God was like. Love, compassion, mercy, forgiveness. Jesus died on that cross, and then he was placed in a tomb. And even though it was a surprise that religious leaders were willing to kill him, his death itself wasn't the surprise. Every religious and political leader died eventually, and evidence shows that Jesus did truly walk this earth and perform miracles, but Jesus' story was different. And this is what makes Christianity different. According to one of Jesus' closest friends, Matthew, some women were heading to Jesus' tomb after his death, most likely to give him a proper burial after following his crucifixion. And then Matthew tells us what happens next. And it's in Matthew 28, verses 2-6. It says, "There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the woman, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here, he has risen, just as he had said. Come and see the place where he lay." Maybe you've gotten used to this story because you've heard so much growing up, but try to imagine what it must have felt like for the women who were at the tomb. That an angel show up and tell them that what had happened with every other dead person wasn't true with Jesus. He didn't stay dead, he resurrected. You don't have to be a scientific genius to know that things like this are not supposed to happen. People don't typically die and come back to life, but in Jesus' case, it did happen. And since this event 2,000 years ago, the Christian faith has been built on the foundation of the resurrection. That's the most important building block to Christianity, is the resurrection. One of the most famous Christians is Paul, and in a letter sent to the church of Corinth, Paul talks about Christ, and he says that, "And if Christ had not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith." That's found in 1 Corinthians. And in other words, without the resurrection, everything we believe is pointless. Going from death to life is what gives us the point of what we believe and why we believe. Paul didn't say that if the earth wasn't made in 6 physical days, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. He didn't say that if Jonah wasn't swallowed by an actual fish, or if Noah wasn't an actual ark, and if Adam and Eve didn't have a conversation with an actual snake, our faith is useless. He didn't say that because those aren't the building blocks of our faith. Because whether science says the earth was made in 6 days or 6 billion years ago, it doesn't really affect our faith because that isn't the point. Those are all theories that truly leave us without answers that God designed to leave out. But what happened on a cross in the days following and what happens at that event represents is what matters. And as you continue to prioritize the foundation of your faith, here's what I want you to do, is build your faith on what matters most. As you prioritize what matters most when it comes to your faith and your future, focus on the main thing. The bottom of your blocks should be your faith. And it should be the vent of the faith of being the resurrection. Here's what's cool about this. The hundreds of people that said that they had seen Jesus with their own eyes after he came back to life. There are multiple accounts of people who wrote about what they saw later. Jesus' closest friends and even his brother James were tortured, and many were killed because they refused to deny that they saw Jesus risen from the dead. Jesus started out as this humble nobody raised in a small town on the outskirts of the Roman Empire, and within a matter of a couple hundred years, the empire had fallen. And the teachings of Jesus had just changed the world. Even people who didn't believe Jesus is the Son of God are living in the world that he has changed. Because of Jesus, people started to see the value of individual lives and not just people in power. Because of Jesus, the idea that there could be a good God who made a world didn't seem like such a strange thought anymore. And because of Jesus, history changed direction. The first followers of Jesus who saw the crucifixion heard about the resurrection and then changed their lives and their culture they lived in. As a result, they understood something. The resurrection was a real event that changed the world and the way we see the world. It's a building block that, when made into the foundation, changes everything. We join a long line of people who place their faith in Jesus because of the resurrection. So, let me ask you again, what is the foundation of your faith? What is the bottom part of your tower? I want to challenge you to do 2 things today, and everything we've talked about in today's message is that don't walk away from your faith unnecessarily. Maybe you've been wrestling with what we've been talking about, and maybe there's a Bible story or passed down belief that doesn't add up for you. Maybe you've learned something in science class that really is tough to argue with and think it is has the potential to topple everything over that you believe. If you build your faith on the resurrection, that doesn't have to be the case. You can ask questions, wrestle with science and evidence, and still keep your faith in place. And the second is to build your faith on what matters most. Your faith in Jesus is based on something that he did 2,000 years ago with the evidence of hundreds of witnesses and friends who died defending on what they saw. Not only that, but you are living in a world that has been completely turned upside down because of Jesus. Culture has shifted to reflect what Jesus said was true about people, meaning that when you head into your future, your faith can stand on a foundation of the resurrection that has changed the world, changed history, and changed individual lives, no matter what challenges science or anyone else's present. When you build your faith on what matters most, you will build a faith that lasts. Science can't explain the person of who Jesus was, the life that he lived, and the resurrection, but that is what matters most. And if you're still unsure how science or faith go together, then you're in the right place. And you have to have important conversations like this in your small groups. And God can handle your doubts and your skepticism that science can sometimes rise. All I would ask is that you would give us and your small group a chance to talk with you about it. Maybe you're on the fence when it comes to faith, or not sure to believe all of this, maybe even because of something you've learned in science class or in an article, someone close to you. And if that's the case, that's great. It's so much better to ask those questions now that will strengthen your faith here, so that when your faith is tested later on, your faith won't waver. As we close this series, I want you to know this. God is a part of how everything works. God is not outside or threatened by it. He actually encourages it. Science gives us an opportunity to learn more about God, who is behind all of the creation. You and I can have faith in God and explore science, the world around us, just because we trust in Jesus, who created the world and changed the world through his resurrection. So when you head back to groups, ask yourself again, what is the current foundation of your faith? Let's go ahead and pray. God, I thank you, Lord, for these students. I thank you for their willingness to be here on a night like tonight. I just pray, Lord, that tonight either encouraged or challenged their faith, Lord. I pray that these students would encounter you in such a way, God, that they would be so solid on their foundational faith, Lord. I pray that you would show up in their lives, Lord, that there would be no denying that you exist and that you love and have a plan for every one of these students. And so as they go into small groups, Lord, would you encourage them to ask hard questions, Father God, that would only strengthen their faith, that their faith would be strengthened by one another, just as your word says. And so, Lord, as they leave this room, I pray, Father, a blessing over them and a continuation of their faith in Jesus' name. All right, we'll see you guys next week.